Yeah.
Is Joe Ferranti. It's not that I'm trying to be aloof. It's just that my camera doesn't work with Teams somehow.
Oh.
I don't know why, but
Well,
anyway, it's better that you don't see me anyway.
I was going to say, we thought you were hiding something.
No, it's the only application that doesn't seem to like my camera. So I'm gonna have to have someone in to take a look at it, but that's where I am.
Okay. I appreciate the explanation.
Okay.
A reminder, everybody, since the meeting's beginning, I'm now starting a recording if you don't already see the alert on your screen.
I think we're waiting for one more and our guest speaker.
Hey, Karen, it's Chris Gulix.
Hey, Chris.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Oh, Jim. Did Jim call in, Aisha?
No, I'm the only party on the phone right now.
So we're just waiting for one more and our guest speaker.
Good afternoon, Jim.
All right, so that's the whole commission. Can Jim hear us, Aisha?
Can you hear us, Jim? Yeah, you're not coming across good. Can you guys hear him?
No.
Sounding very static. Yes. Can you guys hear now? One more time.
Hello, everybody.
Did you hear him?
That was better. Yes.
Are you able to
Yes.
hear Jim?
It's pretty muffled though.
Jim, are you able to hear?
I can hear you loud and clear.
You hear me loud and clear. My mic and stuff is at max.
All right, while we wait for Ms. Butler to join us, we have a pretty simple agenda for today's meeting. Ms. Butler will be joining us from the Solar Energy Industries Association. So I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say. And then the second and final agenda item is to finalize the outline that was circulated to the group and hopefully make assignments as to each section. Oh, Jim is waiting in the lobby. And then from there, we can break up either as each section requires or form subgroups in order to tackle different sections if we feel that it's more involved than one person can tackle effectively because it crosses lines of expertise. So I guess the first goal would be to kind of finalize the big sections. We can talk about the sub bullets under them to a certain extent, but I'm not as concerned about getting all of those ironed out because as you do the research and write your section, it may lead you down different paths. But I think it would be good if we could all agree to a pretty high level framework. We received comments from a few of you regarding the outline that we circulated. And then finally, if time permits, Stephanie has provided us with some interesting information that I believe, Aisha, you could probably share your screen in the video. Or I guess it's a slide deck, not really a video. So that's the agenda for today. I'm not sure what time Ms. Butler will be joining us, so maybe we should get started and we can get interrupted as soon as she chimes in. Do you have an email address for her, Aisha? Could you also, I know you're doing 10 things, do another 11 and reach out to her to make sure that she plans on joining us?
Karen, I just sent her this is David, I just sent her an email
Okay.
helping Asia out, I suppose, but
Thank you.
she did say she had accepted your invitation,
Yes.
was
Ma'am.
planning to join.
She did.
So you're waiting for a reply, Dave?
Yeah, I'll let you know as soon as I hear something.
Okay, then Aisha, you don't need to. All right, have you all had a chance to go through the outline? All right, do you want to pull it up, Aisha?
Yes.
I'm going to give her a quick call, so I'm going to mute for a second.
Okay. So Jim, are you now on a Teams meeting, not just on the phone?
I believe Jim is able to watch and view you, but he cannot speak. So he calls in so that he could speak, but he does not have a microphone so that he can talk. So he's in it through Teams, but he doesn't have a mic. Is
I
that
see.
correct, Jim?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep.
Okay. I
Can you
didn't,
guys see the,
yes, I can see the report format.
okay, let me just, make it a little bigger.
Karen, I just left her a voicemail, so Mr.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So we'll start, and if she joins in, we'll take a break and listen to what she has to say and then resume our discussion so as to make the most of our time.
Version, sorry.
Oops.
I have too many open. All right, this is it. Sorry.
Okay, we can see it. If you want to scroll down a little bit. Okay. So the first obvious section would be the introduction. Joe added that we need to include the legislative mandate as required by the Solar Panel Recycling Commission law. And then I'm thinking a very brief description of how solar panels function. Anybody have anything to add in the introduction? Moving on to the background. Installation and usage trends of solar panels for residential, commercial, and solar farm use in New Jersey. Estimated number in use in New Jersey and expected lifespan of solar panels. Chris added, and I think I had end-of-life disposal schedule, and I think Chris added anticipated end-of-life disposal schedule, which was, a good addition. Making a note that we anticipate that a significant number of panels will reach end of life simultaneously because the big installations started to happen in about 2006. So those panels should all reach end of life at about the same time. However, we need to consider that there's advancements in technology which could also extend the life of solar panels going forward. Another big
Karen?
issue. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just one thing I didn't put in my edits, but I thought maybe we could add other problems such as storm events, defective materials, and other reasons the panels may come out of service. I mean, we have them on poles, so we have motor vehicle accidents, and I know a lot of arrays come out during major storm events. There's damages, so I didn't know if that was an item because that would indicate there's already an issue
Yes.
that's happening.
Good point. Can you add that, Aisha, or should I just take notes separately?
No, I'm ready to add it. What? Please tell me again. Summarize it, please.
I would just put other reasons for end of life, storm events, defects, and other damages.
Storm events.
Defective materials. And then, selfishly, other events you could put, fires as well as like we have motor vehicle accidents from pole mounted.
Also, is there a lot of people who are looking to upgrade and then want to dispose of working panels? Is that common?
This Lyle, I would not say it's common, but it does happen. I mean, all the solar panels in New Jersey are so young that it's early to even make predictions. But we've started to see incidents here and there of modules being removed before their nominal lifespan has been reached, with one possibility to replace them with more efficient modules. So I think based on just a couple instances that I've heard of, we could see more of that potentially.
Well, I think that's covered under the second bullet point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Let's make that a sub-bullet under the second bullet, Aisha.
Here.
No, go down.
Well, the one that we were just in could cover that: storm events, defective materials. Another one could be early retirement.
Okay. So underneath fires.
Well, I was saying other reasons for end of life.
Right. But
Yeah, right, underneath fires, yeah.
Early retirement due to upgrades.
Well, you could just say early retirement for whatever reason, yeah.
Okay, early retirement.
That's fine. And by the way, I've started working on a predictive calculation procedure based on BPU records of how much was installed every year to try to predict the number of modules being, removed for each year, probably through 2050.
Okay, great. Okay. 20. Okay, and then another big topic in the background section would be who owns the panels. Again, just a breakdown of whether it's individual ownership or company ownership or some kind of service agreement, and how that ownership will impact recycling or disposal, depending on the type of ownership it is, and also most importantly, depending on the type of recycling program that the commission recommends. And then another big topic in background would be the types of solar panels, crystalline and film, and what the components of each are, and how much, what are the volumes of hazardous and toxic material associated with each type of panels. And then the next topic in the background section is, maybe this should be its own subsection, is challenges posed in managing the end-of-life solar panels. Actually, I'm thinking that belongs in background, but, and the topics we have covered so far in this section is large number of overseas manufacturers, lack of information relative to waste determination from manufacturers, the long lifespan of solar panels, which could affect any kind of advanced recovery program or APR program that we would consider. Again, the point that when this happens, it could be a large number all at once. Again, another issue, which I'm not sure belongs in here, impact of the advancement of technology on the end of life estimates. I think we probably understand at this point what the lifespan of the existing panels is and could be, but maybe that belongs, maybe as panel manufacturing advances, we may struggle with that. The identification of end markets for the management of components such as glass and metal. And again, that is also always market driven. And the need for development of an infrastructure for those end markets. I think maybe Chris suggested deleting.
No, I suggested deleting this because this, what Chris suggested here, sounds
Okay.
like he refined it. He refined this sentence.
He edited it to make it need for rather than lack of. And I think Chris also added verification of end markets for appropriate use of recycled material. Another challenge is that these panels are built to last and therefore they're difficult to demanufacture. And the logistical challenges associated with end-of-life disposition. So I ran through those very quickly, but anything that we are missing, anything that is there that anybody feels shouldn't be there, anything we want to add sub-bullets for to refine further?
This is Lyle. It may be covered more under the next section, but it seems like a primary challenge is the status of separation methodologies and recycling technologies, and the cost of any such separations and recycling technologies.
Our guest here.
Okay.
So, this is Dunbar. I was going to make another point about the lifespan calculation. We're talking here about end-of-life estimates, but really you're going to have a statistical distribution of failures. And so in an array utility scale, you'll have individual modules go out rather than everything dying at the same time. So I don't know if it gets to a point where there are enough failures that an array owner might decide to just replace all of them, or whether there are ways that those get diagnosed and replaced individually. So that's more of a question, I guess, for everyone.
As an array owner, I would say it's likely that there would be a very small but gradually increasing incidence of replacing individual modules, but the array will get to a point where it makes economic sense to replace them all. So I think it'll be a mixture of those two different ways, Dunbar. But if I were to guess, I would say that the majority of modules in any particular array would be replaced at once at an end of life decision.
Okay.
It's kind of a guess because again, we're not facing those decisions yet. But that's as an array owner, that's the approach that I think I would take.
I think, sorry, to get back to Lyle's point and question before that, I would think that sort of what you'd said, that would fall under the next section pretty well, about costs and current technologies, right? Was sort of what you'd brought up.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of the status of the technology or lack of same, and the cost of the technology as being under challenges, because it seems like those are, maybe our biggest challenges right now.
So maybe we could put a sub-bullet under solar panels are difficult to demanufacture due to solar panel construction, and add a sub-bullet under that says status of separation technologies and costs.
Sure.
And we'll see if it's duplicative when we go down further. I guess does anybody else have anything to add to the section we have discussed thus far? Stephanie, Dave?
Looks good to me.
Sean?
David, I do
Yeah.
not.
Just one observation, with logistics need to manage end of life disposition locally. Is this thinking about a reporting or monitoring? Is there going to be like some enforcement to make sure all this is being done in accordance with what's being recommended?
Well, and enforcement is another good topic. I didn't think of it in this particular context. I think what we were getting at here is to try and develop a program for New Jersey that happens in New Jersey rather than shipping the materials out of state. But I think enforcement is definitely something, I guess.
Well, not so much enforcement, but just, checks and balances and make sure that, everyone is following a plan.
I think that area that Sean is discussing is down in the lower part of the outline, where we're discussing what regulatory framework is needed, what legislative stuff do we need to do. I think you're referring to that part that's a little bit later down in the report.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
maybe,
like evaluation of possible approaches is probably a good system for that.
and maybe add just a placeholder, Asia, down at the bottom, compliance and enforcement, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Inside logistics here.
Yeah, you can leave it there for now, but we may want to move that slower later. So you could highlight it or whatever. All right, it looks like Miss Butler has joined us. Are you on the line, Miss Butler?
I am, yes. Apologies for being late. I unfortunately had another meeting run over. So, and Evelyn is just fine. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I was going to ask you to, provide whatever information you would like. Evelyn is the Vice President of Technical Services for the Solar Energy Industries Association, SEIA. If you guys don't mind, the Solar Panel Commission members, if you could just run through your names and who you represent, what your affiliation is. Dunbar?
Yeah, hi, I'm Dunbar Burney. I'm a professor at Rutgers University and I teach solar And I have a materials background, so I'm interested in this topic.
Dave? Like, you know, Dave.
David Thompson with Panasonic. I think
Yes.
Evelyn knows me fairly well. We're a member of SIA.
Mhm.
Joe?
Joe Ferranti, I'm an attorney. I'm representing Association of New Jersey Recyclers. I've had a long history of involvement in the waste industry.
Nick Byer?
Nick Byer, I'm with an inspector with NJDEP's Hazardous Waste Compliance and Enforcement Bureau.
Dan?
Dan Clark. I also work for DEP, the Electronic Waste Unit.
Nick Nader?
Hi, Nick Nader, New Jersey DEP, Bureau of Recycling and Hazardous Waste Management.
Lyle?
Lyle Rawlings, president of the Mid-Atlantic Solar and Storage Industries Association.
Stephanie?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Lee. I'm an associate professor at New York University, and I do research on emerging solar panels.
Sean Thompson, our co-chair, vice chair?
Sean Thompson, I'm the Director of Local Planning Services at the Department of Community Affairs. And we primarily work with municipalities and other governmental units.
And Chris?
Chris Gulix with Public Service Electric and Gas Utility in New Jersey.
Okay, I think that's everybody. So you know who your audience is, Evelyn.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And again, apologies for interrupting your flow here.
No problem. So I'm Karen Clue. I'm the chair of the commission, and I'm also the chief of the Bureau of Recycling and Hazardous Waste Management. So with that, I will turn it over to you if you would like to tell us a little bit about your involvement, and then if you would be available to stay for questions.
Sure, absolutely. So for SIA, the Solar Industry Association, my group manages a lot of the technical related topics with respect to the entire life cycle of solar panels. So everything from R&D to market-based requirements, regulations for deploying solar. So that includes local codes and standards, as well as national model codes, product standards, you name it. And that's for solar and storage equipment as well. And then we also manage a lot of our member-based work and work products related to the solar circular economy. So everything having to do with the disposition at an end of lifetime, whether that's reuse, resale, or recycling. We also look at quite of the environmental safety and responsibility topics as well for how it's used in the environment itself. And then I also have responsibility for our workforce development topics as well. So really looking at the skills of the personnel involved, not only in deploying solar, but also from an operations and maintenance perspective, where a lot of that end of life type of management activity actually happens. So it's not usually the installers who are putting on solar who are dealing with it if there is replacement, they usually have an operations and maintenance crew or staff that deal with that. So we also cover a lot of their skills and services, as well as training, et cetera. And then I also have responsibility for our environmental and social governance work. So that includes everything from, in the US, OSHA related things, but also having to do with proper labor treatment, making sure all safety and working conditions are, within the requirements of the local agencies or authorities, but that also making sure that we're taking into account things from an environmental perspective as well. So quite a bit there, and I'm happy to take any questions about the work that we do. I work not only on the technical side, but also on the policy side as well. So I've worked with a number of different states in looking at decommissioning as well as solar circular economy, California, Washington, Minnesota, Illinois, New Jersey, in the beginning, North Carolina, Massachusetts, New York, pretty much anybody that's brought some type of policy or regulation to the table, and directly helping to support legislators in understanding some of the technical aspects of what's going on with solar.
Thank you for that. The mission of this commission is legislatively mandated. The governor signed a law establishing the commission to make recommendations for legislative, regulatory, or private sector action within a year of the commission being formed. We understand that California is now handling solar panels as universal waste. Washington established kind of like an EPR program. But I was curious as to what other states are doing or have in the pipeline in order to manage end of life solar panels and equipment.
Sure, happy to comment on that. So for California, we actually worked very extensively with their Department of Toxic Substances Control in not only outlining the requirements for handling, processing, and transportation of solar panels that are intended for recycling. That's what the regulations are actually very specifically oriented around. In that case, you know, the universal waste designation was done by Senate Bill 489 back in 2015. So that actually kind of kicked off that whole process for the agency. And then again, also was involved in Washington, but I'll talk a little bit more about Minnesota and Illinois. Illinois, we've been working with them in a stakeholder process for actually the last couple of years to develop a document that has not been published yet, but is being considered by a couple of specific groups that are more involved in their policy development. One is Environment Illinois, to determine, you know, what they would like to see from a policy perspective and what might be necessary. That document is pretty extensive. It covers not only doing a stakeholder process and study that covers some of the environmental characteristics as well as the appropriate tests, and similar to California is a waste designation necessary in order to implement those, but also from a program perspective, what is going to be necessary from an administration side. So in essence, how do installers or how do O&M providers actually get materials into the recycling stream? And then if not for recycling, if reuse is an option, how do they go about building the right components from a market perspective? So that might be undertaken as well, because that Illinois did see quite a bit of opportunity for reuse in panels and other types of uses, such as off-grid or mobile or DIY type of stuff. So for Illinois, we're just kind of culminating that process and waiting to hear back from them on, you know, what pieces of that summarization they would like to go ahead and put forward into policy. I'm happy to share with you contact information with the lead on that, if that's something that might be useful to your process, and if they feel like it's ready to be shared with others. Minnesota, same type of situation where they did hold a series of stakeholder meetings. We explored a lot of ideas with respect to how to properly manage panels at end of life, you know, if there was a possibility for reuse. They also did quite a bit of discussion with respect to their current priorities in Minnesota, as far as, what other areas, not including solar, might need to be addressed as well, such as, e-waste and other things. That's been a consideration for them, that, focusing on just solar when there are other things as well that are on their plate from this is the Pollution Control Agency, that they might need to address. So we still have some follow-up meetings that we're doing with them to provide them information and some suggestions and guidance. They have a couple legislators who are interested in potentially, again, also putting together policy that might address some of the initial steps towards formalizing a study or directing the agency to do more specific work. The other one I can mention is North Carolina. We were, in which we talked, or we worked extensively with their multi-stakeholder outreach, included also, utilities, the state regulators and agencies, a number of installers, et cetera, also recyclers. But their particular scope included wind and energy storage as well. So it was a little bit heavier lift, if you will, in terms of all the types of topics and scopes they were trying to cover. Their report that they submitted to the Environmental Commission has already been published and is available on the website. If you don't have a link to that, I'm happy to share that with you as well. And essentially what they decided was, first of all, they did need to consider whether or not they wanted to entertain a waste designation of universal waste at a state level. But what they did publish is a process flow chart for how to determine whether or not the solar panel came under hazardous waste designation. So that's a part of the report that I'll send you the link to. And then they also decided, and that's just specific to panels. I'm not going to cover the other topics unless you ask me to.
That's great.
Because like I said, it's like 3 times the info. And the other thing that was a result of that as well was the fact that they did see some inconsistency in some of the sample preparation techniques that are used for the TCLP test, that they is the indicator of whether or not at the material level or the product level, whether or not it's characterized as hazardous waste or solid waste. And so they made some recommendations to the American Standards and Testing and Measurements Organization about publishing a more official sample handling procedure, because what they were finding is inconsistency in those results depending upon how the samples were prepared. There were a situation where one test result case study was presented where the materials were like really finely ground, and it was clear that the results were going to come back rather influenced by how that sample was prepared, versus others in which the samples were more coarsely ground and the test results were different, and that was also from the same panel, by the way. So that was a significant finding, and they had said, we really would like this test or this sample handling procedure to be addressed so that they had consistency amongst all of their laboratories locally who conduct those tests, and that they weren't getting different tests from different labs from different parts of the panel, and it was the same panel. So that was a big conclusion for them. And then the last one was they decided that from a financial assurance perspective, they wanted to wait a little bit before making a decision on that. They wanted to revisit it in several years. I think it's 5 years, because there was already some local requirements for bonding or financial insurance that they didn't want to override. They felt those were taking that those were sufficient at that time, and that it would also give time for the departments there to make decisions about an administration program, the test sampling situation, and the waste characterization before they really started to connect money to that specifically, which could be fairly burdensome for a lot of projects. So those are the three I'd say that have had the most activity since California finished their process. But again, that process has only been enacted since January 1st of this year. And I'm still hearing feedback and gathering information from our members, as well as recyclers that we work with, and municipalities on how things are going and implementation. So it's still a little early to tell if there's any results that need to come of that.
Thank you. Lyle, you have your hand up?
Yeah, hi, Evelyn. I think you answered parts of my question, but I was wondering, with all the states you've worked with and all the actions you've seen, are there particular actions or upcoming technologies that stand out in your mind as particularly progressive or potentially effective?
So by technologies, I guess I'll ask a clarification question. Do you mean from PV modules themselves specifically, or recycling
No, I mean
technologies?
recycling technologies
Okay.
and separation technologies, yeah, or
Sure.
or progressive policies that stand out as very effective.
Okay, got it. So I will say from a recycling technology perspective, we started about 5 years ago working with different recyclers across the country because our goal was at that time to find resources for our members when it wasn't really clear who could who could accommodate crystalline PV module technology at that time. And the reason I'm being specific about that is there are two main technologies on the market today. One is crystalline PV. It's the one that you see most often on residences, on homes, a lot of times on commercial buildings. And then the other is thin film technology, which is more utility scale or large solar project type. And those, the most widely sold and installed thin film technology is for solars, and they do all of their own recycling for their own products. So they actually, as part of their manufacturing site in Ohio, they also have a recycling component to that where they're receiving thin film products, and it's fairly enclosed and well managed. So crystalline is the one that we're mostly focused on because at that time there weren't any recyclers in the United States that could handle that particular technology, mainly because it is sort of a hybrid type of product. It has a lot more glass than recyclers were seeing in e-waste. And then for glass recyclers, it was a lot more polymerics than they were normally seeing in glass recycling. And so what we did is we worked for several years to develop the SIA National Recycling Program, where we actually put out an RFI to many of the recyclers, industrial, commercial recyclers, asking about the capability of their processes and equipment to accommodate the crystalline technology. And then from there, we actually did a series of site visits, process evaluation, work directly with each of the recyclers to help them improve their processes and equipment and their safety and handling techniques so that they could accommodate the product themselves. And so we were able to work with with several different ones in order to establish them and start to send them referrals. And so at that time, a lot of the companies we were working with were utilizing their already existing recycling lines, right? So an e-waste recycler, right, who suddenly had to make adjustments to accommodate, there being more, glass, being crushed in their facility, or a glass manufacturer being able to do different filtering or diversion in order to deal with the polymerics, right? They might have had to add a process in their entire facility in order to accommodate that, or they may have taken other, steps ahead of time to isolate materials, like for instance, removing the aluminum frame first before you're sending the rest of the panel through for processing. And so at that time, there weren't really unique PV recycling technologies. They were being accommodated in existing mechanical-based processes, or in some case, thermal-based processes, where there was some initial crushing and sorting being done, but then, some of the resulting byproducts were being sent to smelter to recover metals and things. So really kind of all over the place as far as processing. What we've seen in the last couple of years is more innovation on recycling technology coming from outside the United States, not as so much within, but we're starting to see that change a little bit. For instance, in Japan, there was a really large national research project that a lot of the module manufacturers and recycling industry, came together to work. They were given grant funding to pursue developing innovative technologies. One, for instance, it was called like the hot knife technology, where they took a wire that basically like tried to separate the layers of polymerics, right, that the laminators manufacturers used so well, sandwiched and encased the solar cells. There were other things like using robotics to remove the frame, so that was less of a manual approach. And other types of things, could they narrow or separate the module into more manageable strips, for instance, of layers of polymeric, so that they could isolate the solar cell. We've also seen Europe, they developed a technology which more kind of mimics a hybrid between e-waste and glass mechanical processing. And what they did is they put it into an enclosure the size of a container, like a shipping container, so that they could actually ship it to the large PV projects there and do some of the processing on site, right? Where they were actually just taking the module off the array, putting it through the processor, and then separating it into the residual materials, and then shipping those residual materials as separated to different locations. So that's another one that we've seen. The Department of Energy recently released a RFI, or request for information, just in early May or so, and responses were due just a little bit over a week ago, basically asking industry and stakeholders for information about what types of challenges are there from an end-of-life perspective, what kinds of things that we would like to see the Department of Energy support in what would eventually be a full-blown funding opportunity announcement. And that would be the type of thing that different organizations based in the US can respond to, either for doing R&D on new innovation for PV recycling technology. So if somebody's got a great idea of how to do that in the US, very similar to like what they did in Japan, there could potentially be a multi-million-dollar research grant for something like that, as well as a number of other ideas about what needs to be addressed. So sorry for the long answer on the question about innovation, but I just wanted to kind of give you the full perspective on why we're at where we are today, which is mostly working with glass recycling specialists in our network, a lot of them in Ohio, for crystalline, or why, from our perspective, we're also working with a lot of e-waste legacy recyclers, but we're also seeing some focusing of some of those recyclers just on solar, maybe as like a division, for instance, within their organization, and then trying to adjust their existing processing technology or processing lines to deal with the idiosyncrasies of solar, like the glass and the frames and all that stuff.
Dave?
Yeah. Thank you, Evelyn. I was going to ask you to talk a little bit about the SIA national program, which you did, but we do have representatives from the Association of New Jersey Recyclers and another individual recycler on the phone. So it'd be nice if you would explain, how people may become a member or a participant in the SIA program. And then secondly, I think it would be interesting if you would comment on the, SIA experiences in Washington State and the DOE experiences and why the implementation had been delayed.
Sure, happy to cover those. So with respect to how recyclers can become part of our program, which essentially what we're trying to do with that program is not only highlight the capabilities and availability of companies who do recycle, at a national level. We list all of the partners on our website, and because not only do we want our members to use them, but we want everybody or anybody who's interested in recycling modules to have access to them. Again, we're trying to encourage that from an end-of-life perspective. And so what we do from that perspective is we do send out an initial questionnaire. We ask a number of questions about the processes they're using, their accreditation, any specific information they can share about some of their downstream capabilities or resources. Again, what we would also like to see is where, as much as possible, the materials are reused in some way, whether as inputs into new manufacturing or in other methods. And so we do, that kind of initial evaluation. And then we usually set up a couple of meetings with the organizations, again, to get a sense of, what their current capabilities are, what industries they're working with, if there's any questions they have about the program. We are very much interested in working with accredited facilities for processing, but we also have some organizations that only do aggregation. So they're just collecting or transferring, which is also fine. Because we know, again, we're trying to build the network geographically as much as possible. And then usually, after we get a chance to speak with, their folks, we'll do a site visit. Unfortunately, the pandemic of the last 18 plus months really prevented us from doing any site visits. We had to stop doing those, unfortunately. So I've had a number of applications kind of just waiting for us to be able to go and do those visits. David has been on some of those with me. And essentially what we're doing is a walkthrough of the entire process, meeting with their local staff, assessing what kind of, security, et cetera, they might have. Believe it or not, panels are very popular as security risks for some folks, especially if they're in reusable condition. They can retail for as much as $500 per panel or more, depending upon the technology. So we have seen, unfortunately, instances where that has happened. And then we also want to just have a chance for their staff to ask us questions. And that's why we like to take manufacturers with us on these site visits. They may have questions about the technology, about the composition of materials, suggestions about how to physically manage the panel itself. Should they take the frame off ahead of time? Should they pop off the junction box and all the wiring? Does it make it for easier processing, et cetera? So we want to be there to help with that. And then, once we have gotten through that process, we basically draft an agreement between them and the organization and SIA. We would like them to become a member of SIA as well, if that's possible, because that's our easiest way to connect them with a lot of our members. We, depending upon how, what level of membership they would like, they can also join our working groups, where we do have a lot of member engagement for this particular area. We have a solar circular economy working group that also that addresses policy and regulations that are being proposed or revised. And then we also have a couple smaller task groups, one on communications, one on environmental safety topics and material composition topics. And then we will be starting a new reuse one as well, because that's another area that our members have asked us to look into. And that is how we kind of carry on our ongoing engagement. And the recyclers, join all those discussions. We've got a number of them involved today, working directly with the manufacturers and developers and owners. And then, so I think that covers how to join the network. We also tend to try to highlight those recyclers at some of our regional shows and conferences, because again, we want folks to know that that's a service that's available to them. So depending upon, the area, we may try to do a panel at one of our conferences on end of life or recycling, and have them speak to folks that are attending that conference or that trade show. And then I'm blanking, David, on your second question. I've already forgotten.
It was about Washington State.
Washington State.
Yeah. The OE perspective, the SIA perspective, the delay in implementation, I guess.
Sure. Thank you for reminding me. So one of the challenges that we had with Washington and their approach was that the state was really eager to really kind of copy and paste their e-waste program to cover solar. And there were a lot of, differences, that we felt were that weren't being addressed, such as the service lifetime of the products, right? From an e-waste perspective in Washington, they were seeing a regular influx of e-waste being recycled because, people are updating their laptops, their cell phones, their iPads on a regular basis, 2-3 years, where for a solar panel, we're really talking 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. If there's a warranty issue, the manufacturers, in many cases are taking back that panel, or the distributor is taking back that panel and replacing it with a new one. And then we're dealing, kind of behind the scenes on how that panel gets just recycled or dispositioned. Not really the homeowner or the business owner, right? They're still working through their installer, or they're working through, excuse me, the manufacturer to manage that. And the real disconnect we were having with the Washington program is they still wanted us to implement many of the facets of their e-waste program. So things like having one recycling location for every X number of residents, right, in the locality. And in some cases, a large city, it was going to require us to develop like 50 recycling locations in one large city area. And it didn't really match, because it wasn't like a homeowner was going to take a panel off the roof and, bring it to this location to be recycled, kind of like how you would recycle your batteries at like a Best Buy or something like that. That was the kind of blueprint that they wanted. And so we were really trying to explain to them that that wasn't really how things were going to work, and that we really needed, more of a detailed stakeholder process to collaborate together and work on that. And then the other, the thing that we were concerned about is, because of the approach in asking the manufacturers to be solely responsible for the complete costs of not only setting up the infrastructure, but also the costs of recycling itself, was really causing some manufacturers to rethink their desire to supply modules in that state. So there were several manufacturers who decided to no longer distribute or sell to distributors in Washington, which really started to affect the availability of and variety of product that was going to be available to the installers there. They were not very happy about that either. And again, it was just another input into the conversation that we really needed to work more closely with Washington's Department of Ecology, to make something that was more reflective of how, solar, the life cycle of solar and what happens there. And so we ended up going back to the legislature in January of last year and asked them for, and as well as the original bill sponsor, and she did agree that there were some of those nuances that really need to be addressed. So she actually sponsored the amendment to that bill to basically call for that revival of the stakeholder collaboration process and then delay the date of enactment so that we could give more time for that to happen. And so we're in that period right now, and we would, unfortunately, also due to COVID though, the funding that was accompanying that process and that study was partially vetoed by the governor because they were directing pretty much all of their appropriations to dealing with the health situation in Washington. And so we're going to be working to try to get that funding reinstated in the next process so that we can really go back and work better together to really make something workable in Washington.
Would you happen to know how much in funding is
Yes, it
being considered?
was.
Sorry.
I want to say it was like $100,000 or $150,000. It was not. It wasn't anything over 200, if I recall. I want to say 100 to 100,000, and that was primarily to support Washington State University to developing a research project and getting the facilitation resources they needed to carry out that process.
Any other questions for Evelyn about Washington? Do you have a status of the California program? I know that it was only passed or it had an implementation date of January of this year, maybe.
Mm-hmm. So I can tell you where folks are at with California. So California's Department of Toxic Substance Control, one of their requirements is that anyone who plans on handling, transporting, or processing has to comply with their notification system. And so that does, include the recyclers themselves, as well as anyone else. There are certain parameters, based upon the quantity that you're handling, et cetera, as to, how you notify. And then also from, locations, if there's multiple locations that you have. So that process is underway right now. And the DTSC wasn't accepting those notification forms until January 1st. So they got quite a lot of email starting on January 1st. And then they were in the process, the first couple of months going through and verifying all of that, both for small generation universal waste handlers, as well as large generation. And then they developed a list of all those folks, and that's now available on their website as well. I think there's over 70 that are listed on there today. And then next steps is really they're starting to collect data and information on a regular basis from those notifications to ensure that everybody's in compliance and staying with their permitting, within their permitting. So for our members, those who have been part of that notification process have sent in, their information, and they're just managing through it. What we're hoping to hear in probably won't be till the end of the year, is if there have been any, challenges, that the DTSC themselves have recognized and recorded, or any issues, that they've noticed with the process itself, such that modules can then be, processed and recycled in California.
And has CEHA worked in New Jersey with legislatures or recyclers, or what is the organization's involvement in New Jersey, I guess is my question.
Sure. So we did a bit of engagement, I think, at the beginning when the policy or the legislation was first being put forward. We provided some public comments to that, as well as worked through our lobbyists to get clarification on certain areas. And we were also very eager for David to join the commission to also provide, his expertise. David has a lot of background, not only with solar, but with batteries as well. And so we're really thrilled that he was able to join your group here, so that we try to keep him up to date on all of the things that are going on as well, to share with all of you, as is related to the work that you're doing. We do have a state affairs manager who monitors and works with our members and other entities in the New Jersey area, but I believe his role is more from a broader perspective of policy related to solar, either I guess much broader than the recycling topic. So he and I, converse pretty often to try to keep each other up to date as well, if there's anything that we can do to help support his work. But really, I would say primarily through David, we're here to help support him with resources or help or get clarification on things that he might be getting questions from all of you, et cetera. So, and we would be, happy to, like today, share information about whatever we have going on or trends that we're seeing or activities and projects that we're pursuing, if not through David, directly.
So a really, broad question is, are there trends the association is seeing that states are leaning one way or another during these policy discussions and stakeholder meetings and reports? And it seems like states are tackling these little differently, but like we have the commission, others have stakeholder process. We would go to a stakeholder process when we started promulgating rules. That is generally when we engage industry and environmental stakeholders. This is nice because we have the commission has such a broad representation on it already, so we can get a feel before we go on to the rulemaking part of the stakeholder process. But I was wondering what the association is seeing as any kind of national trend.
Sure, I can definitely share information on that. So I think one of the most common things we're seeing is that there's definitely not a one size fits all approach, and that each of the states, because they also have, in many cases, their own approach to waste disposition, recycling, that differs based upon, their local resources and also their current legislative situation, right? There's nuances that have to be taken into account. And so, we're often asked, should there be a federal or a national approach to all this? And it's like, well, RECRA, right? That was the reason that came to being, at that level. But we do get asked about it for solar. And again, it differs because how each state handles, their end of life practices also differs. But what we are seeing is that there is more of a recognition that it's not necessarily just one party that is responsible for managing solar at its end of life. And that's because there are many stakeholders involved. Solar is not uniquely just, for instance, a consumer based product. There are many municipalities and local governments that have solar on their rooftop. There are hospitals, there are schools, there are universities that have solar. There's utilities that also have their own solar. And so at the end of the day, what we are seeing is that there is more of an approach of, and then the other thing is it's also not just the manufacturers, but the installers, for instance, the developers, the owners. And most often the manufacturers of solar often have their own manufacturing related waste that they're dealing with. For instance, if the product quality wasn't what they wanted and they've got scraps to deal with, that's a waste situation they're dealing with. Sometimes the distributors of solar, it's really common, especially in states where there are a lot of solar installers, for a distributor to actually be the one responsible for sending panels for recycling, because they're accepting warranty returns back on behalf of the manufacturer, or they've got products that their installer customers were broken on site or broken during logistics. So they've either got insurance to deal with that, or they're directly dealing with it. It could be the developer owner during the building process is experiencing some waste themselves for the same reason. Something was broken during staging, or it broke during the build. And then, the end of life or in the operation phase, right? There could be a weather event, that causes damage to the panel and it's got to be replaced, and then something, set for disposition, or at the end of life. And so what we're seeing is more of a recognition that the waste is not necessarily just coming from the end of life, but there's various other aspects. And so the question of who is responsible is often related to where in that stage of life that the product has the need for management. And so some of the ideas originally we've seen about, extended producer responsibility, or, advance deposit or advance fee recovery. Thank you. Sorry. It's still Monday. I'm still drinking coffee, as you could see, even though it's like almost midday where I am. And, other things like, is this something that's a utility bill attachment, right? Those all tend to be one size fits all approaches. And so the question is, how do we dig more deeply into those situations so that the solution is appropriate for, that stage of life? So, and that there's the ability to also deal with some of the exceptions that come up, where if people abandon the product, in some way, shape, or form, how do we make sure the local municipalities aren't, burdened with that process? So that trend is what we're seeing more recognition of from state to state, is also depending upon what type of solar happens to be more prevalent in that state. Like, is it more utility oriented projects? The solutions might be more geared toward that, or is there more distributed solutions in that state? Are we seeing more residential and commercial industrial solar? Is there an equal representation of that? Meaning then there's got to be different approaches that have to be managed. I think that's the biggest recognition that we're finding, and that at a legislative perspective, it's really hard to implement a one size fits all when you have, clearly all of these different situations coming to light, and what's appropriate, might be different, in, for instance, Texas than it is in New Mexico, because of the type of solar that's there. I will say that one thing I have seen more people acclimated to is if there was an approach that's reasonable for the advanced recovery fee, similar to how e-waste does it in some states, then there is more of this kind of shared responsibility feeling about how it's administered. So, you know, that advanced recovery fee that's collected, like, you know, in here in California, if I buy an iPad, you know, I pay an extra $10 or $15 in advance. I know that's not the total cost of processing that iPad at end of life, that there's some other costs associated with that administratively that's maybe being covered another way, but at least you feel like I'm doing my part. You know, maybe the municipality's doing their part, maybe the manufacturer, the developer owners doing their part, et cetera. So I am starting to see that being talked about, but I would say I don't think there's a silver bullet, if you will, if you don't mind me using that analogy, to the problem. So I very much appreciate the discussion that you all are having, and that it's not easy to come to one solution.
Your words make me feel like what the commission is going to be seeking out or looking to create is something that is like a multi-pronged approach. Like it's no one size fits solution. It may be something, whereas if you have this type of panel and you fit this criteria, this is the path for you. And if you have this type of panel and this is your level of ownership, this is the path for you. It may require us to analyze all of the different scenarios and make a different response for each one of these.
I think that's certainly a possibility, and I know that's not an easy, you know, approach to take on either. So, you know, I know also the feedback that, you know, I also work very often with stewardship organizations, actually. And, you know, what they have been telling me is, well, whatever the solution is, make it clear, you know, to everybody so they know exactly what's expected of them if they fall into this role or that role, and then make it easy for them to comply. So make it clear, make it easy, even though behind the scenes it might have been, you know, very complicated or complex to get to that solution. Because at the end of the day, when you're dealing with things like waste or recycling, you want people to be able to comply with it without having to, you know, understand all that background, right? It's like 1, 2, 3, tell me what to do. I can do it. It's done. I feel good about the fact that I did, you know, my part. So I think that's the challenge, is the getting to what those solutions are, you know, is probably the biggest lift. But if we can also make it very clear, you know, for folks in the different roles and easy for them to comply, you know, I think you'll get much more cooperation.
Chris?
Hi, Evelyn. Chris Gulix with PSE&G. Thank you for participating. This has been a lot of great information. We appreciate your time. But one question I had for you, have you heard any additional details about manufacturers making determinations of their materials as both as either hazardous waste or non-hazardous waste? What we see in the industry is a lot of discrepancies relative to what panels and types and manufacturers are considered hazardous and regulated under RCRA, and what are not. And I guess the second part of that is, you know, that determination could become more difficult if each state does their own thing, or if some states do nothing, because a lot of the points of generation are not going to be the state in which it has to be shipped for recycling or demanufacturing. So I don't know if you have any information relative to that.
Yeah, I think, so I think the compromise that some of the states have made is the recognition that you know, and this is in the context of other types of products as well, the recognition that while the modules themselves may have been made with materials that could be characterized as hazardous, there's a recognition that there is much in our everyday life that is in the same boat, right? So my laptop sitting in front of me, I'm sure there's stuff in there that is not accessible to me that could qualify as hazardous. My cell phone, you know, any other appliances, batteries, things like that. And so I think that's why we have been focused on, you know, the TCLP test as being the indicator. You know, we started about 5 years ago, really, and I'll just use the word pushing our manufacturers to have those tests done on their products, even though it's a test that's normally only done at end of life, right, to characterize that situation, right? Because however the product has been utilized over its lifetime, you know, I don't know if there could be changes, but it's at that point of end of life when you're trying to decide, you know, is it hazardous or not? And a lot of the PV modules that were manufactured probably from before 2000, you know, 12-ish, 2015 timeframe, they probably had more lead-based solder in them than what's being produced, you know, post 2015, et cetera, because we started to see a lot of changes in actually maybe even before 2015, it should be before 2015, because cost was really a driving factor, right, in order to make solar competitive as an energy generating resource. And so manufacturers were already trying to innovate their products to reduce the amount of certain materials like silver, you know, and you know, really looking at how to reduce the cost. And so a lot of compositional changes took place in that time frame. But the thing is, those products that were manufactured and installed before that real focus on innovation, you know, those are, you know, 25, 30 years in the field, right, before they're probably going to be replaced or going at end of life. So, you know, something that was installed in, let's say, 2010, just to make the math easy for me, you know, that's going to be out there until, you know, the 2035 timeframe, right, in all average lifetimes. And so if we were to fast forward to 2035, take that module out of that project and then have it tested for TCLP, probably has a lot more of those constituents that would be, you know, that were used more often then. So like higher levels of silver, which could characterize it as hazardous, right? Even though that's a valuable material. Maybe higher amounts of lead in it as well, but also maybe other things. Versus today, when we're looking at a lot of the products and the technology that manufacturers are using, you know, just in the last 3 to 5 years, you know, significantly different. You know, the reliance on tin bismuth instead of lead soldering, like eons less silver, like the amount of silver used in a panel is so much significantly less than you know, several years or 10 years ago. In fact, like in I think 2010, the solar industry made up like 40% of the silver supply market, where now it's less than 10%, right? From that point in time. So that influences it considerably. And then also we're starting to see, you know, from a manufacturing trend perspective, the use of more organic materials in solar cells. There's a lot of work being done by NREL and other national labs into looking at different types of cell composition materials in order to address, you know, not only the higher efficiency, but also the environmental status of the module itself. So we do have some manufacturers who even today, you know, they've done some tests on their more recent products. They've they've received, you know, sustainability certifications on them as well as being validated as to the composition of materials as being non-hazardous. So that trend we're also starting to see happen more often. So it could be that what's installed, you know, from say about 2018, you know, forward, you know, what's going to be out there is much less, contains much less from a hazardous material perspective. So what we usually sum that up with a lot of our recycling partners is, you know, this 2 decades, if you will, in front of us of a recycling potential and opportunity for those valuable materials, and that type of material composition is probably much more critical, you know, than when we start to see end of life of today's panels, you know, in 2050, for instance.
Hey, Evelyn, this is David. Does SIA have I just don't recall, does SIA have a position on universal waste handling for solar panels? I mean, you know, from my perspective as a former TV manufacturer, it seems like cathode ray tubes are being moved around as universal waste, and they have, you know, an incomparable amount of lead, much more lead, for example, than a solar panel would ever have.
Agreed. So I think, you know, from a position perspective, given today's framework, right, from a RCRA perspective, solid waste, universal waste, hazardous waste, universal waste is definitely a better compromise for us as an industry, mainly because if there were a category in between, for instance, solid waste and universal waste, you know, quite honestly, I think we would a majority of our products would actually even be able to meet that rule, if you will, whatever that could be. But I think universal waste right now as a compromise is good for us in terms of highlighting the fact that these aren't products that should be just kind of dumped in your household garbage can, right? So they're something that does need to be professionally installed, and it should be professionally disposed of, right, from a commercial perspective. So similar to like it requires an electrician to connect to, you know, the system, it also requires a technically proficient person to remove the product from your house or your building, and then to be managed accordingly, right, as an industrial product, similar to like, for instance, a refrigerator, an HVAC unit, any other types of building materials that so yeah, if, like I said, if there were a category in between from a materials perspective, you know, that might be something we could qualify for. But I think today, given the framework that exists, universal waste does make sense.
Thank you.
I actually never gave thought to the fact that the panels are like electrical, they're hardwired through something. It's not just a matter of like just like going to my phone and popping out this battery and taking that out. That actually requires a qualified technician or a person with a skill to do that. And I did not realize that in all the discussion that we having about recycling this solar panel. I don't even think I even incorporated that into my thought process that someone physically has to remove these. It's not like putting it out in my recycling bin.
Exactly. Exactly.
Anybody have any additional questions or comments for Eleanor? Well, thank you, Eleanor, for joining us. It was a wealth of information. We are currently in the process of finalizing our outline for our report, And if you wouldn't mind, if the folks from the commission assigned to certain topics have questions for you, would you be comfortable with them reaching out?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very much open to that. I very much appreciate all the time you've given me to discuss things with you here today. And I feel free to reach out. You've all got my email, I think, or can be provided with my email or phone numbers. And yeah, I very much appreciate all the time you've given me to chat with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Okay, thanks again.
No problem.
Thanks.
I will leave you all to it and have a great week, and hopefully stay cool if you're in hot places like I am today. So
Same to you.
yeah, take care.
One
Thanks,
last thing.
Thank you.
Can you provide the point of contact for Illinois and the link for the North Carolina report?
Sure. Let me make a note here to make sure I do that, and contact. You bet. I will send that to you all as soon as I disconnect.
Okay, great. Thanks
Alrighty.
again.
All right. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that was great. We have just about a half hour left to try and get through the rest of the outline. And it's back up. Thank you, Aisha.
You're welcome.
I think the section we're on now is current and developing recycling technologies. First big topic is exactly that in the US. What are the current technologies being used and what are the limits, constraints of technology being currently used? And something that Stephanie talked about and Eleanor just touched on was what are technologies that are under development and the viability of those technologies in the short term and the long term. I arbitrarily chose 5 years. I don't know if that's a practical amount of time or not. Any comments or suggestions on this section?
I think this might overlap a bit with what we added to the section before on the separation technologies. I don't know if we want to move that down or because I think it's kind of the same.
Yeah, that's true. It is one of the.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is this section we're on now is what are the technologies, and I think it's descriptive where before it was a description of the challenge in terms of the lack of appropriate technology and its cost. So I think it does deserve mention as a challenge for sure because it's probably the biggest one.
So maybe not delete it from here, but also add it to the sections.
Karen, I don't know if it was someone on this call or Evelyn, but I think she mentioned, I think it was Evelyn that mentioned a DOE call for information for recycling technologies. I wonder if we can, and Evelyn said, I think that the deadline for submitting the information has just passed. I wonder, can we rely on a DOE report for this, or do we need to reinvent the wheel here?
I don't know. I don't know what's in that report, so that would be a really good resource to take a look at.
Yeah, this is Lyle. This probably is related to the challenges I had in engaging the DOE to be a guest on here, because when I first suggested it, they said, well, there could be competitively sensitive information here, and they were reluctant to come and speak to our group. And hopefully now they'll be less reluctant. But it seems from what Evelyn was saying that even though it was a request for information and a request for feedback, it was related to potential grants.
Yes,
is why I think they were a little reluctant. So as far as them issuing a report, if it is tied up with a grant review for awards, it may take a while.
Mhm.
I'll see if I can find out and try again in terms of having the DOE Office of Solar Technology speak here.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to know what they're looking for, what they got in compared to what we are looking for. So,
Yeah. You bet.
Well, so this is Dunbar. Let me second what Lyle said. It's not likely that they'll give us a summary at this phase when they issue an RFI. Then they are going to take that in, and it probably is indicative that they'll offer a grant. And in the terms of the grant request, then we can learn what they learned. But it won't be issued soon.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
okay, back to Stephanie's point, Aisha, if you could grab the status of separation technologies and costs, copy it, don't delete it, and move it down to viability of developing technologies.
Karen, you think there and not the current recycling facilities?
What occurred? Oh yeah, maybe that's better.
Just yeah, like as a under current recycling facilities, maybe as a third bullet here. Sorry.
Yeah, that's good. That's better. No, yeah, but I don't think you need it under the viability also.
Oh, I thought I took it out. I did undo. Sorry.
Thank you. Anything else in this section? I mean, I think this is really going to be a very big section, very long. Well, I think it's very important, but I'm not sure how to flesh it out much more in this outline.
Will the development of these technologies be dependent on downstream markets at all for materials, or do we need to consider that?
Yeah, I think maybe under what are the limits, constraints of technology being currently used.
Okay.
Maybe it's a sub bullet under that, under status of separation, availability of downstream markets. Does that fit?
I think so, at least as a placeholder.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, and then we move on to the comparisons. It looks like we'll have a couple other states to add based on what Eleanor said, because North Carolina's report is already out. And so I would add North Carolina under
California.
Yeah.
And then because Dr. Lee sent that paper on the facility in Japan, would we want to add that under the European Union perhaps, or?
Yeah.
That would go up above in recycling technology, wouldn't it? What Dr. Lee circulated.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking if we're doing comparison of current approaches, that would be something to compare to.
Might actually go in both. So just before we don't get too ahead of ourselves, where you put North Carolina is not correct, because that's the sub bullet under there belongs under California, not under North Carolina.
And Karen, it's Chris. She also talked about Illinois and Minnesota.
Right.
As well. So I don't know the status of those two states, but.
Yeah, so I would add North, and then another hard return, Illinois and Minnesota. Although she didn't really, or I didn't capture what the status in Minnesota was, other than they're in the stakeholder meeting process, it sounded like. So I don't know if they have anything.
Minnesota was similar to Illinois, except it was one minor difference, and I think it was the stakeholder. I'm not sure.
My sense is those two states, Illinois and Minnesota, are going through a similar process as we are right now.
Right.
We just call, it's called different things. And I participated in the Illinois stakeholder process, and they are trying to develop some sort of, policy recommendation report. And I think what Evelyn said was that's before Illinois EPA now for review. I don't know about Minnesota.
Yeah, she said, right, that it's not final yet. It was less clear to me what the status of the Minnesota process.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not sure what's going on in Minnesota.
So under Illinois, can you put a sub-bullet saying, draft report underway or not final yet?
Under review, maybe?
Yeah, under review, right. And then under North Carolina, apparently their report is available on their webpage, and I think Eleanor sent a link for that. Right. And then under Minnesota, put Japan. And then the European Union. Anything else in that section?
I thought actually Stephanie did a great job of tracking down some of the financials behind it that were not actually contained in the PDF file. And so what Stephanie wrote is should be added to.
Yeah, I'm not sure where to add the.
No.
Well, I guess as we move down, we do talk about. Do we talk about the financials associated with each?
Yes.
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 Economic impacts, treating solar panels using each of the possible solutions. So moving on to the evaluation of each of the possible approaches. First approach would be status quo, do nothing different. A second possible approach is an EPR. Third, advanced recovery fee. The fourth, designating solar panels as New Jersey universal waste. Or for recycling or other non-reuse disposition, a landfill ban, a mandate or provide incentives for reuse or recycling through regulation, other, and then we have a list of things that we had been talking about over the past several months, requiring detailed labeling of content for panels installed in New Jersey, use of alternative materials that are more readily recyclable, role of designing for the environment in solar panels. Can there be better design for easier recycling? I think Chris added impact to surrounding or nearby states or communities. And then the evaluation of each possible solution should include the environmental impacts.
I'm sorry. Could we, do you think, move impact to surrounding or nearby states or communities? That shouldn't that go under evaluation for each should include?
Oh, okay.
Like, wouldn't that make a little more sense that way?
I think so. What do you think, Chris?
I think I put that in. That would be fine.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dave.
Yeah, that wasn't me.
I think it's a good suggestion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hit return, Aisha, so it becomes its own bullet.
Oh, you wanted its own bullet.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, my bad. I should have been more clear.
And then indent. Yep. Perfect. Evaluation for each possible solution should include a impact to surrounding or nearby states or communities, environmental impacts to water, air, soil, and wildlife, human health impacts, direct and indirect exposure, economic impacts, direct, indirect costs to consumers, residents, industry, state and local governments. And then somebody else added market impacts to solar industry and environmental goals at the state, local levels.
I just think for clarity there. So, I mean, the direct, indirect costs to industry are industry and business generally outside of the solar industry, whereas then that last bullet specifically is market impacts to the solar industry, right? Is what we're saying. I mean, that's how I would take it looking at it. And I think as we developed this, that was sort of the thought on that bullet about costs to industry, was just, you know, the business community generally. Does that make sense to everyone?
Oh, as a user of solar?
As a user of solar, as yeah, or like, you know, generally it's like if this would have some impact on the whole power market or anything like that, an impact on business and industry in the state of New Jersey other than to the solar industry. Whereas that last one is specifically, you know, what would each solution do to the solar industry? And I think, you know, even that could be stuff like, yeah, like, do we have if parts of the business community that are big installers of solar arrays or that lease land to that? I mean, I think that, and I could be wrong, but I know at least for a while, they were allowing that to count as like part of the farm assessment revenue type stuff, you know, so things like that, where it could just be generally that if you know, what the, because otherwise, if that's not the case, if that second bullet is referring to the solar industry, then that and the last bullet are repetitive.
Well, I was glad that this was added because, you know, the costs that may be incurred from any requirements or advance fees or you know, no matter how it's done, the costs and also the potential you know, delays and the amount of red tape involved as well could potentially have a dramatic impact on the solar industry and on its ability to create and maintain jobs in the state. And currently, we estimate there's probably 10,000 jobs in the state related to the solar industry, direct ones, not to mention all the indirect. And you know, costs can have a very dramatic effect. It's non-linear because just to sort of do a capsule description of the game we're playing here between the legislative requirements for growing solar and the state's you know, climate change and renewable energy goals, on the one side and the agencies that are responsible, primarily BPU. And the industry is a game where the BPU's job, as they see it, is let's see how low we can go in incentives without the industry dying, right? So it's and this has been going on for years. It's, you know, how, and we agree that what we're trying to do is get to the minimum rate of return that an investor can get to and still build it, right? So the BPU's job is to go as close to that line as possible. And our job is to help them do that. If they succeed and we're right on that line, then an additional cost is either going to crash the industry if it's substantial, or the BPU will then have to go back and raise the incentives again. In fact, I think this bullet point probably should be 2 bullet points. One is the market impacts of the solar industry, and the other is the impact of meeting those goals, like in the Clean Energy Act. So I think it requires some careful thought of how this interacts with the goals of the BPU and the health of the industry. You know, just doing rough calculations of the kinds of costs we could be talking about. I took what Stephanie sent out before of this new Japanese technology, which is really cool, by the way, and the just doing some rough costing based on what was in your document, Stephanie. You know, it might come out to 6 cents a watt currently, but for older panels, about double that, like 12 cents a watt. That's a pretty big percentage. It's roughly equivalent to the entire profit that a company would earn putting in the solar panels, just to give an idea of scale. So, you know, it's good that we have a bullet point here that says impact or indirect cost to consumers and residents. That's sort of tied into these questions as well. Because as I said, you know, it would either potentially seriously affect the pace of growth of solar and the ability to meet the goals of the Clean Energy Act, or require higher incentives to pay for those costs, and then it's going to impact ratepayers. So these are all, I'm just saying, these are all really important bullets to consider carefully.
I was
Right, it
trying to
sounds like
stay
that's
along with you. I don't know if I captured that.
Yeah, I'm just reading. Yeah, well, I think you did, but I would say that now you can erase the second part of the previous bullet. In other words, market impact of the solar industry, full stop, and then the next bullet sort of takes the place of that one. But on the next bullet, I would say impact of meeting renewable energy goals of government, BPU, et cetera. Great.
okay. And then we start talking about the feasibility sensitivity of each proposed solution, the political feasibility, the likelihood under that, the likelihood of political support, if we can anticipate it, impacts on stakeholders, and therefore their willingness to support or at least not oppose whatever solution we choose. The feasibility of the implementation, is it unique to the solution? And the environmental regulatory process, would it be required? And what kind of permits? And are there environmental justice considerations associated with these?
Lyle again, I just thought of this, but maybe in that section, there's the question of when. right? Since the substantial volume of modules being retired will be years into the future. You know, is there a phased approach, and when do we get to, you know, the full scale requirement? So yeah, maybe a bullet about the timing of implementation.
Yeah, I like that idea. I mean, I think especially too with some of this, if, you know, if we have 10 years, say, until there's a huge flood of panels, and there's some great solution where the infrastructure could be in place in 5 years, that's great news. But if there's going to be a flood of panels in 5 years and it'll take 10 years to set up the infrastructure, that's a different story.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we have to take into account there are panels coming out of service now from storm events. You know, even from, not that we're a significant contributor to that, but we have anywhere around 100 to 150 panels a month that come out of service from our pole mounted systems. So, and like I said, I know from weather and storm events, there's other arrays that have portions coming out that have been damaged. So there, but I agree, the big hit will be in, you know, more time than what I'm speaking now. But I think we need to take into account an amendment of a process sooner that at least allows industry to start coming into New Jersey to be able to do this.
Right. So it's again, a long-term, short-term problem and therefore a solution, right?
Yep.
So 100 panels a month get hit by cars?
Easily, yes. Yeah, I mean,
1,200 year.
I can tell you we have about 171,000 pole mounted panels throughout the state. And last accounting I have, about 185 panels every 45 days or so come out.
That's terrible. I mean, it's terrible.
It is terrible.
It's never mind, yeah, you know, and the panel situation on top of it.
Yeah, right. There's two things. One, right, we have tons of motor vehicle accidents, and everybody seems to be attracted to a utility pole. And the other item we have too is that when we have storms and we have damage from trees and so forth, you know, there is a very urgent need to get power restored. So sometimes the panels are damaged in the process of just trying to get power back, right?
Okay.
The panel is not a primary focus for us. It's restoring service to our customers. So sometimes we have, during those events, panels that are incidentally damaged in some respect, or they just come down off a pole and they're then taken back for evaluation too. But yeah, we have, from a disposal standpoint, that number is pretty consistent.
That works out to just under like 1% a year.
Chris, I'm sorry, I'm sure you've answered this already, but what do you do with the panels after you need to dispose them?
Right now, we are sending them out as hazardous waste to a hazardous waste landfill in Michigan.
Okay, thanks.
And that 185 panels every 45 days, is that just auto accidents, or is that auto accidents and damage from storm event or repair or?
Yes, it's a combination of all that. Yep. And on average, it's an average, obviously.
Right. Okay.
And would you happen to know the cost?
I do, but I would hate to throw out that number. I can, you know, one of the problems too is that the panels are very light, obviously, right? But they take up a lot of space. So when we ship them out, we get charged with minimum charges when they hit the landfill. So both transportation and landfill, you get charged a minimum charge for the weight. So, you know, if it would be, you know,
That's
from
okay.
the number, yeah, okay. It is not inexpensive. But the interesting thing is, you know, the numbers that I've received so far from some of the out-of-state recycling companies, the cost would end up not being too different
Okay.
The only savings we would see is that they charge you for actual weight, not a minimum weight.
And then I think the conclusions and recommendations section won't get assigned to anybody at this point, obviously, but the outline for that is, if you could scroll back up, Aisha. Which approach or approaches would be most suitable for New Jersey? Which solution is the most feasible based on our criteria? How sensitive is this solution to certainty, uncertainty in the data? Are there two or more solutions that are similarly feasible? And then I think we would work on a framework that would provide a description of what the operations would look like. Is there legislation that's necessary? Is there regulation that's necessary? What kind of policy framework would need to be put in place? What are the private sector actions that are necessary? And then added to that original list, what would the state or local resources needed to carry out the approach? Scroll back down a little bit, Aisha, because I did not cover the other ones that were added. Are changes to regulations necessary for the recommended approach? What policy framework would be necessary for the recommended approach? So I think that those two that are added are covered similarly using different words.
Right. But I didn't know which one to delete.
Yeah. I think we can leave those. So I know we're over in time, but I was really hoping to put everybody on the spot during this meeting and ask them to take a section, a subsection, or form a work group to take a larger chunk of this outline and put pen to paper and come back to the group within a month for the next monthly meeting and let everybody know how far you got. So this is my idea. I am absolutely open to suggestion, but if we all take our section and we work on it, I think it's going to take far longer than a month to write up what our section is going to look like and come back to the group with a well-formed section. However, I also don't think I want to put off a monthly meeting. I was thinking perhaps while we're in the writing phase, we check in every month to bring up questions or challenges that you're having to the group to see if the group can help out, and also to monitor, our progress as a group. Does anybody think that works? Has better ideas? This is my first time kind of doing something like this, so.
Hey, Karen, it's Chris. I've got a 3:30 I've got to jump off to. I hate to do this, but would it be possible to set up like another quick call, maybe this week, next week, to talk about what sections the group would want to take on? Give us a little time to think it through individually and then come together.
Oh, that's a good idea. I think Mondays generally work for most people. I know Stephanie has a conflict Monday a month, right?
Not for the summer, so.
Oh, okay. So maybe same.
Dunbar may have a Monday conflict, but we'll find out when we ask.
All right, so why don't you shoot for next Monday at 1:30, Aisha?
Okay.
And see about people's availability, and in the email invitation, put that suggestion that this is going to be a short meeting just to assign or volunteer for different sections of the final report as discussed in the outline in the previous meeting, something like that.
And Karen, possibly in the meantime, people could send emails to you and Ashia volunteering for sections or bullet points within sections that they're willing to work on, and maybe if they're willing to take a lead responsibility or a helper responsibility.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And that way, if we hear from you guys, we can assign it on the outline, and next week when we talk, we can have that displayed. So if you have time to go through it within next week, time to think about it and volunteer for the points that you would like to research and cover, that would be terrific. All right, well, I don't want to hold everybody. Thank you for staying in there, and we'll be in touch for next Monday.
All right, and Asha, you'll be sending out an update on that outline? Yeah.
Yes, I will.
All right, thank
All
you.
right. Thanks
Okay.
again, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Monday, 1:30.